This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The shadows in the pines. Hannah tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles whitening. The narrow road leading to the Winters estate twisted and turned, flanked by towering pine trees. Fresh from rehab, she felt both excited and nervous about her new job as a nanny. The Winters had seemed kind and understanding during the interview, especially after learning about her past. They believed in second chances, and Hannah was determined not to let them down. The estate was a sprawling old mansion, its stone walls covered in ivy. As she pulled up to the front, Mrs. Winters greeted her warmly, her smile reassuring. "We're so glad you're here, Hannah. Teddy is excited to meet you," she said, leading Hannah inside. Teddy was a small, pale boy with dark hair and large, expressive eyes. He looked up from his drawing as Hannah entered his room. "Hi, Teddy, I'm Hannah," she said, kneeling to his level. "Hi," he replied shyly, clutching his crayon. Hannah glanced at the drawing, a crude representation of the woods, with black, shadowy figures lurking among the trees. She suppressed a shiver. "You're quite the artist," she commented, trying to sound cheerful. Teddy nodded but didn't say anything more. The days passed uneventfully. Teddy was a quiet child, preferring to draw or play by himself. Hannah often found him at the window, staring at the woods with a distant look in his eyes. He rarely spoke, but his drawings spoke volumes. They were always of the woods, filled with dark, menacing shapes that seemed to move and shift on the page. One evening, as Hannah tucked Teddy into bed, he finally opened up. "Do you believe in ghosts, Hannah?" he asked, his eyes wide and earnest. Hannah hesitated. "I'm not sure. Why do you ask?" "There's something in the woods," he whispered. "I see it in my dreams. It watches me." A chill ran down Hannah's spine. "It's just your imagination, Teddy. There's nothing in the woods that can hurt you." Teddy didn't look convinced, but he nodded and closed his eyes. Hannah watched him for a moment, before turning off the light and leaving the room. That night she couldn't sleep. Teddy's words echoed in her mind. She got up and walked to the window, looking out at the dense forest. The moon cast eerie shadows among the trees, and for a moment she thought she saw something move. She shook her head, blaming her overactive imagination, and went back to bed. The next day, Teddy was more withdrawn than usual. His drawings became darker, more detailed. The shadowy figures were now clearly humanoid, with long, claw-like fingers and hollow eyes. Hannah's unease grew with each passing day. One afternoon, she decided to take Teddy for a walk in the woods, hoping it would dispel his fears. They followed a narrow path, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Teddy clung to her hand, his eyes darting nervously. "See, Teddy, there's nothing to be afraid of," she said, trying to sound confident. But as they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over them. Teddy tugged at her hand. "We need to go back." Hannah nodded, feeling an inexplicable urge to leave. They turned around, but the path seemed different, more twisted and unfamiliar. Panic set in as they struggled to find their way back. The shadows among the trees seemed to shift and move, and Hannah could almost feel eyes watching them. Finally, they stumbled back onto the main path and hurried home. Teddy was trembling, and Hannah's heart was pounding in her chest. She vowed never to take him into the woods again. That night, Teddy had a nightmare. He screamed and thrashed in his sleep, and it took Hannah a long time to calm him down. "They're coming," he sobbed. "The shadows are coming." Hannah held him close, her own fear growing. She knew she had to do something. The next morning, she called Mrs. Winters and told her about Teddy's nightmares and drawings. Mrs. Winters listened, her expression grave. "Teddy's always had a vivid imagination," she said, "but this sounds different. We should talk to someone." They decided to bring in Dr. Peterson, a child psychologist. He spoke with Teddy and examined his drawings, his brow furrowing in concern. "There's definitely something troubling him," Dr. Peterson said. "I'd like to try some therapy sessions to help him express his fears." The sessions seemed to help, but Teddy's drawings remained dark and unsettling. One evening, as Hannah cleaned his room, she found a new drawing hidden under his pillow. It was of the woods, but this time there was a figure in the center, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, standing among the trees. Beneath it, Teddy had written one word: soon. Hannah's blood ran cold. She showed the drawing to Mrs. Winters, who looked equally disturbed. "No, we need to get to the bottom of this," Mrs. Winters said. "There has to be an explanation." That night, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the trees. She thought she saw movement again, a flicker of shadow among the pines. Unable to sleep, she decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and quietly slipped outside. The cold night air bit at her skin as she made her way to the edge of the woods. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted branches and gnarled roots. She ventured deeper, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Suddenly the beam of light caught something, a figure standing among the trees. It was tall and dark, with glowing eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. Hannah froze, unable to move. The figure took a step toward her, its long fingers reaching out. She screamed and turned to run, stumbling through the underbrush. She didn't stop until she burst out of the woods and collapsed on the lawn, gasping for breath. Mrs. Winters and Dr. Peterson rushed outside, alarmed by her screams. Hannah tried to explain what she saw, but her words came out jumbled and frantic. They helped her inside and called the police, who searched the woods but found nothing. The next day, Teddy's drawings were different. The shadows were gone, replaced by bright, cheerful scenes of the woods. He seemed happier, more relaxed. "I told them to go away," he said simply when Hannah asked. Hannah never ventured into the woods again, and the estate slowly returned to normal. But every now and then she would catch Teddy staring out the window, a faint smile on his lips, and she couldn't help but wonder if the shadows were truly gone, or if they were just waiting for their chance to return.
The mourner's circle. Artie always felt an unexplainable pull towards the melancholy. Ever since he was a kid, he found solace in the silence of cemeteries, in the rows of headstones that bore witness to lives lived and lost. It wasn't death that fascinated him, but the stories left behind. By the time he was 22, Artie's fascination had morphed into something of a mission. He started the Mourner's Circle, a club dedicated to attending poorly attended funerals. Artie's idea was simple. Everyone deserved to be remembered, even if only by strangers. He posted flyers around town, at community boards and cafes, detailing the club's intentions. The initial turnout was meagre, just a couple of friends humouring him, more curious than committed. But Artie didn't mind. He believed in the cause, and if nothing else, it gave him a sense of purpose. It was at the funeral of Mr. Harold Larkin, a man whose obituary was just a few lines long, hinting at a reclusive life, that Artie met her. The service was sparse, a priest mumbling rote prayers to a nearly empty chapel. Artie, sitting near the back, noticed the woman immediately. She was striking, with raven black hair and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. Her eyes, a piercing shade of green, never left the coffin. After the service, as the few attendees shuffled out, Artie found himself lingering. The woman did too. She stood by the casket, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "Did you know him?" Artie asked, approaching her cautiously. She turned to him, her gaze cool and assessing. "No," she said. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "But everyone deserves a farewell." Artie felt a shiver run down his spine. "I'm Artie," he said, extending a hand. "I started the Mourner's Circle." "A noble cause," she replied, ignoring his hand. "I'm Evelyn." Evelyn. The name suited her, old-fashioned and elegant. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn became a regular at the club's meetings and the funerals they attended. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, her presence both comforting and unsettling. Artie couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something about her that felt off. Evelyn never spoke much about herself. She deflected questions with practiced ease, turning conversations back to the deceased or to Artie's passion for the club. But as the weeks turned into months, Artie couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her. One evening after a particularly lonely funeral, Artie found himself walking Evelyn home. The streets were quiet, the air thick with the promise of rain. They walked in silence for a while before Artie finally asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Why do you come to these funerals?" he asked. "Really?" Evelyn stopped, turning to face him. Her eyes glittered in the dim light. "I told you, Artie. Everyone deserves a farewell." "That's not an answer," he pressed. "Not really." She smiled then, a slow, enigmatic smile. "You're right," she said. "It's not." They continued walking, and Artie felt the unease growing in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but something about Evelyn was deeply unsettling. He tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to him like a shadow. It was only later, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, that Artie remembered the stories his grandmother used to tell him. Stories of creatures that walked among the living, hidden in plain sight. Vampires, she called them, but that was nonsense, wasn't it? Just old wives' tales. And yet, as the days passed, Artie couldn't shake the feeling that there was something otherworldly about Evelyn. He started to watch her more closely, noticing the little things, the way she never ate or drank at their gatherings, the way her skin seemed to glow in the moonlight, the way her eyes seemed to see right through him. Artie began to dig, searching for any information he could find on Evelyn, but there was nothing, no records, no history. It was as if she had appeared out of thin air. One night, unable to sleep, Artie decided to follow her. He kept his distance, watching as she made her way through the dark streets, moving with an almost unnatural grace. She led him to a part of town he rarely visited, a neighborhood of crumbling buildings and forgotten alleys. Evelyn stopped at an old, dilapidated house. Artie watched as she entered, the door closing softly behind her. He waited for what felt like hours before finally mustering the courage to approach. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing a dark, musty interior. Artie's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped inside. He moved cautiously, his eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. He found Evelyn in a back room, standing over a small, candlelit altar. Her back was to him, but she turned as he entered, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "You shouldn't be here, Artie," she said, her voice soft but firm. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Evelyn sighed, her expression sad. "You've always been too curious for your own good." She moved then, faster than he could react. One moment she was across the room, the next she was inches from him, her breath cold on his skin. Artie tried to back away, but his legs felt like lead. "You've been so kind," she murmured, her eyes boring into his. "But some things are better left unknown." Artie's vision blurred, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He tried to speak, to move, but his body wouldn't respond. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was Evelyn's sad, knowing smile. When Artie woke, he was back in his own bed. His head throbbed and his mouth was dry. He sat up slowly, the events of the previous night flooding back. But when he checked his phone, it was as if nothing had happened. No messages, no missed calls, just a single unread email from Evelyn. "Thank you for everything. Remember me kindly. E." Artie never saw her again. The mourner's circle continued, but it was never the same. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd brushed up against something ancient and powerful, something that defied explanation. In the end, Artie kept his promise. He remembered Evelyn kindly, even as he wondered if she was still out there, attending the funerals of the forgotten, giving them the farewells they deserved.
Hell's corporate ladder, Peyton strode into the infernal headquarters with a confidence that belied his position. He was a low-level demon, barely a shade above the damned souls he tormented daily, but he had big plans. Today, he'd present his latest idea to the demon board, and if all went well, he might just earn himself a promotion. The air in Hell's cubicles was thick with sulfur and the acrid scent of desperation. Demon employees hunched over their desks, typing furiously on Hellfire keyboards, while middle management barked orders. Peyton's cubicle, a drab little corner decorated with motivational posters like "Burn Bright" and "Pain is Progress," was his starting point every day. "Hey, Peyton!" a voice called out. dragging him out of his reverie. It was Glenda, the receptionist, a demoness with a fiery mane and a smile that could melt iron. "The board is ready for you." "Thanks, Glenda," Peyton replied, mustering a grin. He straightened his tie, black with little pitchforks, and grabbed his presentation materials. This was his chance. The demon boardroom was an intimidating place, filled with high-ranking demons who'd clawed their way to the top. Literally. Scars and missing limbs were badges of honor here. The head of the table was occupied by Baal, a hulking figure with horns that scraped the ceiling. His eyes glowed like embers as he surveyed Peyton. "Welcome, Peyton. You have 5 minutes. Impress us," Baal rumbled. "Thank you, sir," Peyton began, his voice steady. "I present to you the Soul Harvest Efficiency Program." He clicked a button, and a holographic screen flickered to life, displaying charts and graphs. "Our current soul harvesting methods are outdated. We're wasting resources and time. My program streamlines the process, increases torment quotas by 30%, and reduces overhead by 15%. The board members leaned in, interest peaked. Peyton continued, detailing the finer points of his plan. He emphasized the potential for increased productivity and the sheer volume of misery they could inflict. When he finished, the room was silent. Baal's gaze was unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Interesting. Implement your program on a trial basis. If it fails, you'll wish for the Lake of Fire." Peyton nodded, barely containing his excitement. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." Back at his cubicle, Peyton was greeted with cheers from his fellow low-level demons. "You did it!" Glenda exclaimed, handing him a cup of brimstone coffee. "Thanks, Glenda," Peyton said, taking a sip. It tasted like victory. "Now, let's get to work." The trial period was grueling. Peyton worked tirelessly, often pulling double shifts. He devised a new torment schedule, incorporating psychological torture alongside the physical. It was a hit. Souls wailed in despair, productivity soared, and the board was pleased. One evening, as Peyton was compiling his final report, he noticed a shadow looming over his desk. It was Malthus, the office bully and middle manager, with a permanent scowl etched into his face. "Nice job, Peyton," Malthus sneered, "but don't think you're going to skip ahead in line. I've been here centuries and you're not cutting in front of me." Peyton smiled politely, hiding his disdain. "Of course not, Malthus. Just doing my job." Malthus leaned in, his breath rancid. "Good. Keep it that way." As Malthus stormed off, Peyton's smile widened. He knew the corporate ladder in hell was a brutal climb, but he had a secret weapon: innovation. And a little sabotage never hurt either. Weeks passed, and the Soul Harvest Efficiency Program was a resounding success. Baal summoned Peyton to the boardroom once more. "Peyton, your program has exceeded our expectations. You're promoted to Assistant Torture Manager. Congratulations." Peyton accepted the promotion with a humble bow. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored." With his new title, Peyton gained a modest office and a team of underlings. He relished the power, delegating tasks and watching his subordinates squirm, but he wasn't satisfied. His sights were set on higher positions. Malthus, now infuriated by Peyton's rapid ascent, plotted against him. He spread rumors, tampered with reports, and tried to undermine Peyton's credibility, but Peyton was always one step ahead. He anticipated Malthus's moves and countered them with cunning precision. One fateful day, Peyton discovered Malthus's ultimate scheme, a plan to frame him for embezzling Hellfire funds. Peyton couldn't let that happen. He devised a counterplot, ensuring that when Malthus executed his plan, it backfired spectacularly. The ensuing scandal rocked the infernal headquarters. Malthus was demoted to soul collection duty, a humiliating fall from grace. Peyton, on the other hand, was commended for exposing the corruption. Baal himself congratulated him. "You've proven yourself time and again, Peyton. As a reward, you're promoted to Senior Torture Manager. Keep up the good work." Peyton's office now boasted a window with a view of the Lake of Fire, a status symbol he cherished. He'd climbed the corporate ladder in hell through a mix of innovation, hard work, and ruthless ambition. But he knew the game was never truly over. As he settled into his new role, Peyton couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Climbing the corporate ladder in hell was hellishly difficult, but it was also strangely exhilarating. The torment, the scheming, the endless struggle, it was all part of the infernal fun. And so Peyton continued his ascent, ever mindful of the demons below him, ever vigilant of those above. In Hell's corporate world, the only way to survive was to outwit, outlast, and out-torment everyone else, and Peyton was more than ready for the challenge.
Desolation drift. In the infinite expanse of space, the salvage crew of the Starlight Voyager had seen their fair share of derelict vessels and floating debris, but nothing could prepare them for the sight of the Galactic Empress, a once luxurious passenger liner that had disappeared without a trace 30 years ago. Captain Eliza Kane watched the massive hulk drift silently against the backdrop of distant stars. Her crew, seasoned but uneasy, murmured among themselves. The Galactic Empress was a ghost ship, its whereabouts unknown until now. Its sudden reappearance stirred whispers of superstition and dread among even the most stoic of the crew. "We're going in," Eliza announced, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The promise of valuable salvage and potential historical artifacts was too tempting to ignore. As the Starlight Voyager docked with the Empress, the crew suited up, their movements methodical yet tense. The airlock opened with a metallic groan, and the team stepped into the darkness of the abandoned ship. "Lights on," Eliza ordered. The beams of their flashlights cut through the oppressive blackness, revealing a scene of eerie stillness. The interior was remarkably well preserved, the opulence of its design still evident beneath a layer of dust and neglect. Gilded chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals casting ghostly reflections. "Stay together," Eliza cautioned. "And keep your comms open." They moved cautiously through the grand corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The ship seemed devoid of life, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the air, as if they were not entirely alone. "Captain, look at this," called out Miko, the ship's engineer. She pointed to a series of claw marks gouged into the metal walls, the scratches deep and erratic. "What could have done this?" Eliza frowned, her unease growing. "I don't know, but stay alert." The crew pressed on, their nerves fraying with each step. They reached the grand ballroom, a vast space with high ceilings and ornate decorations. Tables were set as if waiting for guests who would never arrive. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and pungent. "Over here," said Jackson, the medic, pointing to a pile of old uniforms and discarded personal effects. "It looks like they left in a hurry." Eliza knelt to examine the items, her flashlight casting long shadows. Among the debris, she found a logbook, its pages yellowed and brittle. She flipped it open, skimming the entries. They spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the dark, and passengers disappearing without a trace. "This doesn't make any sense," Eliza muttered, her brow furrowing. "What happened here?" A sudden noise echoed through the ballroom, a soft shuffling sound that sent a chill down their spines. The crew spun around, flashlights darting across the room. In the far corner, a figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Who's there?" Eliza demanded, her voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a ghastly sight. It was a man, or what was left of one. His skin was pallid and stretched tight over his bones, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He wore the tattered remains of a passenger's attire, and his mouth hung open in a silent scream. "Help me!" The figure rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jackson rushed forward, but Eliza held him back. "Wait, something's not right." The man collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. Jackson knelt beside him, scanning for signs of life. "He's barely hanging on, Captain. We need to get him back to the ship." As they lifted the man onto a stretcher, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced around the ballroom, her flashlight sweeping across the room. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the shadows, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Back on the Starlight Voyager, the crew worked frantically to stabilize the man. Jackson administered medication, his hands steady despite the tension. "He's in bad shape. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and some kind of infection I've never seen before." Eliza watched as the man's breathing steadied. His eyes fluttered open, and he grasped her hand with surprising strength. "Beware. The darkness. It's alive." His grip slackened and he slipped into unconsciousness. Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine. What had he meant by that? Suddenly, the lights on the Starlight Voyager flickered and the ship's systems began to malfunction. "Captain, we're losing power," called out Miko from the control room. "Something's interfering with our systems." Eliza rushed to the bridge, her mind racing. "Can you pinpoint the source?" Miko shook her head, her expression grim. "It's coming from the Empress. Some kind of signal is disrupting our electronics." "Cut the link," Eliza ordered, but it was too late. The Starlight Voyager shuddered violently, and the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic spread through the crew as they scrambled to restore power. Eliza's flashlight beam flickered, casting eerie shadows. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was another passenger from the Empress, his eyes vacant and skin deathly pale. "They're coming for us," he whispered, his voice echoing in the dark. "We opened the door, and now they won't let us go." Before Eliza could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the chilling words hanging in the air. She felt a cold dread settle in her bones. The darkness was alive, and it had followed them from the Empress. Desperation fueled their efforts as they fought to regain control of the ship. Miko managed to restore auxiliary power, and the lights flickered back on, but the sense of dread remained. The once silent corridors of the Starlight Voyager now seemed to pulse with an unseen malevolence. Eliza gathered her crew in the control room, their faces pale and drawn. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice firm. "Set a course away from the Empress. Whatever's on that ship, we can't let it follow us." As the Starlight Voyager powered up its engines, Eliza glanced out the viewport at the Galactic Empress, now a distant silhouette against the stars. She knew they had escaped for now, but the dark secrets of the Empress lingered. A haunting reminder of the abyss that lay just beyond the light.
The Secrets of Hollow Grove, Prologue. In the small town of Hollow Grove, nestled among dense woods and misty hills, Dr. Eleanor Price was a revered psychologist known for her groundbreaking research on childhood trauma. Her Victorian mansion, a grand but foreboding structure, loomed at the edge of the town, overlooking the tranquil yet eerie landscape. The townsfolk admired Dr. Price, but there was something unsettling about the Price family, something that sent shivers down their spines. Chapter 1. The New Arrival. It was a crisp autumn evening when a new patient arrived at Hollow Grove Institute for Mental Health. 12-year-old Thomas was the latest addition to Dr. Price's caseload. With tousled hair and wide, fearful eyes, he was brought in by his frazzled parents who claimed that Thomas had been seeing things, dark, shadowy figures that whispered to him at night. Dr. Price welcomed Thomas with her warm, reassuring smile, her eyes glinting with curiosity. She was particularly interested in cases involving hallucinations, for they often led her to deeper, more intriguing psychological phenomena. Chapter 2. The Experiments. Unbeknownst to the townsfolk, Dr. Price's mansion housed a secret laboratory in its basement, a place where she conducted her most controversial and clandestine experiments. The basement walls were lined with shelves filled with journals, strange apparatuses, and jars containing preserved specimens. Dr. Price's two children, Clara and Henry, were well aware of their mother's secret work. They had grown up in the shadow of her experiments, often assisting her in ways that blurred the lines between innocence and complicity. Clara, the elder at 16, was fiercely intelligent and shared her mother's passion for psychology. Henry, 14, was more reserved but equally curious, always following his sister's lead. Chapter 3. Thomas's Nightmares. Thomas's first few sessions with Dr. Price were uneventful. She asked him about his family, his school, and his dreams. But it was during the third session that Thomas revealed something that piqued Dr. Price's interest. "They come at night," Thomas whispered, his eyes darting around the room as if he feared being overheard. "The shadows. They whisper my name and tell me to follow them." Dr. Price leaned forward, her heart pounding with excitement. "And have you ever followed them, Thomas?" Thomas shook his head vehemently. "No, I'm too scared." Dr. Price smiled, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Would you like to try something, Thomas? A way to confront these shadows and see what they want?" Chapter 4. The Experiment Begins. That night, Clara and Henry helped their mother prepare the basement laboratory for Thomas's arrival. They set up a bed in the center of the room, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Thomas was brought in, drowsy from the sedative Dr. Price had given him. As Thomas lay on the bed, his eyes fluttering shut, Dr. Price spoke soothingly to him. "You're safe here, Thomas. We're going to help you face your fears." Clara and Henry watched as their mother placed electrodes on Thomas's temples and attached them to a machine that emitted a soft hum. Dr. Price had developed a method to induce and monitor dreams, allowing her to observe and interact with her patients' subconscious minds. Chapter 5: Into the Abyss. Thomas's body twitched as the machine worked its magic. Dr. Price, Clara and Henry watched the monitor, which displayed a series of fluctuating lines representing Thomas's brain activity. After a few moments, Thomas began to speak in a low, guttural voice. "They're here," he mumbled. "The shadows." Dr. Price leaned closer, her breath quickening. "What do they want, Thomas?" Thomas's face contorted in fear. "They want me to follow them. They say they can show me the truth." Dr. Price exchanged a glance with Clara and Henry. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Thomas," she said gently, "I want you to follow them. See where they lead you." Thomas's body went still, his breathing shallow. The room seemed to grow colder as a palpable tension filled the air. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, and Henry's hands trembled. Chapter 6: The Truth Revealed. Suddenly, Thomas's eyes snapped open and he sat up, his expression one of utter terror. No, I won't go with you." Dr. Price rushed to his side, her voice calm but firm. "Thomas, what do you see?" Tears streamed down Thomas's cheeks. "They're here, in the room. They're all around us." Clara and Henry looked around, their hearts pounding. They saw nothing but felt an inexplicable presence, a darkness that seemed to seep into their very souls. Dr. Price's voice wavered. "Thomas, what do they want?" Thomas's eyes locked onto hers and his voice was a haunting whisper. "They want revenge. They say you've done terrible things, Dr. Price." Chapter 7: The Past Unveiled. Dr. Price froze, her mind racing. The shadows, the whispers. She had encountered them before, during her earliest experiments on children. She had pushed the boundaries of ethics and morality, driven by her insatiable curiosity. Some of her subjects had disappeared, their fates unknown. Clara and Henry stared at their mother, their admiration turning to horror. "Is it true?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Did you hurt those children?" Dr. Price's face paled. "I did what I had to do for the sake of science." Thomas's voice grew stronger, almost triumphant. "They say your time is up, Dr. Price. They won't rest until justice is served." Chapter 8: The Final Confrontation. The lights in the basement flickered, and the room grew unbearably cold. Clara and Henry huddled together, their fear palpable. Dr. Price backed away from Thomas, her mind a whirlwind of fear and regret. Suddenly, the shadows seemed to coalesce, forming dark, indistinct shapes that hovered around the room. Whispered voices filled the air, condemning Dr. Price for her sins. "No," she screamed, covering her ears. "I did it for science, for the greater good." But the shadows were relentless. They closed in on her, their whispers growing louder and more accusatory. Clara and Henry watched in helpless terror as their mother was enveloped by the darkness, her screams echoing through the basement. Epilogue. The next morning, the townsfolk of Hollow Grove awoke to find the Price mansion abandoned. Dr. Eleanor Price and her children had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only rumors and whispered tales of the horrors that had taken place within those walls. Years later, the mansion stood as a dilapidated reminder of the secrets it once harbored. Some said that on cold, misty nights, you could still hear the whispers of the shadows, seeking justice for the children who had suffered at the hands of Dr. Eleanor Price. And so the legend of Hollow Grove lived on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within even the most revered minds.
The Night Stalker's mark. Dr. Evelyn Ross stood alone in the dimly lit autopsy room, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the faint metallic scent of blood. She brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face and focused on the lifeless body on the cold steel table before her. The victim, a young woman in her mid-20s, bore the telltale marks of the city's most infamous serial killer, known only as the Night Stalker. Evelyn had been a medical examiner for over a decade, but the brutality of this killer's work never ceased to unsettle her. The precision of the cuts, the deliberate nature of the mutilations, it all spoke of a mind both brilliant and deranged. As she made the first incision, her mind drifted to the night she received the phone call that would change her life forever. It was a cold evening when Detective Jack Warren called her. His voice was tense, carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. "We found another one, Evelyn," he said. "Same signature. We need you at the scene." Evelyn had arrived to find the body of a young man, his throat slashed, his body arranged in a grotesque parody of a peaceful repose. The killer had left behind a single calling card, a blood-red mark in the shape of a crescent moon carved into the victim's chest. From that moment on, Evelyn had become obsessed with the Night Stalker. She spent countless hours poring over case files, analysing the victim's wounds, and trying to decipher the killer's twisted psyche. But despite her efforts, the killer remained elusive, always one step ahead. Tonight, as she examined the latest victim, Evelyn's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was a photo of herself taken from outside her window. The message beneath it read, "You're closer than you think." Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, her eyes darting to the small window at the far end. She saw nothing but darkness beyond. She tried to steady her breathing, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold, invisible hand on her shoulder. Evelyn's mind raced. How had the Night Stalker found her, and why was he taunting her now? She quickly finished her work, documenting every detail meticulously, and then hurried to her office to call Jack. "Jack, he's watching me," she said, her voice trembling. "He sent me a photo. He knows where I am." "Stay where you are," Jack replied, his voice urgent. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Lock the doors." Evelyn hung up and locked the door, her hands shaking. She paced the small office, her mind replaying every interaction she had had with the Night Stalker's victims. What was she missing? What was the connection? Jack arrived, his presence a small comfort in the midst of her fear. Together they reviewed the latest evidence, searching for any clue that might lead them to the killer. "I've been looking at this all wrong," Evelyn said suddenly. "The crescent moon, it's not just a mark, it's a symbol. He's trying to tell us something." Jack frowned. "A symbol of what?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But there's something else. The victims, all of them, were found near water. Rivers, lakes, even fountains. There's a pattern here, Jack." As they delved deeper into the case, a chilling realization began to take shape. The crescent moon was a symbol of change, of cycles. The killer was choosing his victims based on the lunar calendar, striking at the peak of each lunar phase. "We're running out of time," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The next full moon is in 2 days." The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic activity. Evelyn and Jack worked tirelessly, trying to predict the Night Stalker's next move. As the full moon approached, the tension grew unbearable. On the night of the full moon, Evelyn and Jack staked out a popular riverside park, a likely hunting ground for the killer. They waited in the shadows, their eyes scanning every movement, every flicker of light. Hours passed, and just as they were beginning to lose hope, Evelyn spotted a figure moving silently along the water's edge. She nudged Jack, and together they followed, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The figure stopped near a secluded alcove, and Evelyn's blood ran cold as she saw the glint of a knife in his hand. Jack moved swiftly, drawing his gun and stepping forward. "Police, drop the weapon." The figure turned, and in the pale moonlight, Evelyn saw the face of a monster. The Night Stalker was a man in his late 30s, his eyes cold and calculating. He smiled, a chilling expression that sent shivers down her spine. "Too late, detective," he said, his voice eerily calm. "The cycle is complete." Before Jack could react, the killer lunged, slashing with the knife. Jack fired, the shot echoing through the night. The Night Stalker fell, his body collapsing into the shallow water. Evelyn rushed to Jack's side, her heart racing. "Are you okay?" Jack nodded, his face pale. "I'm fine, it's over, Evelyn, we got him." But as they stood over the fallen killer, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. She knelt beside the body, her eyes searching for answers. And then she saw it, a small blood-red crescent moon carved into the killer's own flesh. "The cycle is complete," she murmured, her mind racing. But what does it mean? As the dawn broke, Evelyn and Jack realized that the Night Stalker's death was only the beginning. The crescent moon was a symbol of rebirth, of new beginnings. And somewhere in the city, another monster was waiting, ready to continue the cycle. Evelyn knew that the game was far from over. The Night Stalker had left his mark, and now it was up to her to uncover the truth. She vowed to hunt down every last one of them, no matter how long it took. The cat and mouse game had only just begun.
The shadows. We flee. Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, the distant mountains casting long, ominous shadows in the late afternoon sun. She glanced at the old farmhouse at the end of the gravel road, its weathered wood standing in stark contrast to the vibrant wildflowers dotting the landscape. Her cousin Sophie had invited her here, promising a safe haven. After everything Elena had endured, safety felt like a foreign concept. As she stepped out of the car, Sophie appeared on the porch, her smile wide but her eyes haunted. They embraced, the scent of lavender and fresh hay enveloping them. Sophie's warmth was a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in Elena's bones since her escape. "Come inside," Sophie urged, leading Eleanor into the farmhouse. "I made tea." The interior was cozy, filled with antique furniture and family photos. It felt like a different world from the barren compound Eleanor had fled. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups. "I can't believe you're here," Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." Eleanor forced a smile. "I've missed you too. I'm just glad to be out." Sophie reached across the table, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." For a moment, Elena allowed herself to believe it. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the warmth. But as the evening wore on, a sense of unease settled over her. Something felt off, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. After dinner, Sophie showed Elena to her room. It was simple, with a single bed and a small window overlooking the fields. Exhausted, Eleanor lay down, but sleep eluded her. The silence of the countryside was oppressive, and every creak of the house set her nerves on edge. In the dead of night, Elena awoke to a soft, rhythmic chanting. Her heart pounded as she crept to the window. Below, in the moonlit yard, she saw a group of figures standing in a circle. Their low voices carried on the breeze, a familiar, chilling cadence that sent shivers down her spine. She stumbled back, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not again. The next morning, Elena confronted Sophie. "What was that last night?" Sophie's face paled. "You saw them?" "Who are they?" Elena demanded, fear and anger mingling in her voice. Sophie looked away, her expression troubled. "They're part of something old. Older than the cult you escaped. I didn't know they would come here." Elena's blood ran cold. "You have to tell me what's going on." Sophie sighed, her shoulders sagging. "It's a long story, but you deserve to know. This place has a history, a dark one. Our family has been tied to it for generations. The cult you escaped, it's just one facet of a larger, more insidious web." Elena listened in stunned silence as Sophie recounted the family's history, their ties to ancient rituals and secret societies. It felt like a nightmare, but the terror in Sophie's eyes was real. "We can leave," Sophie said desperately. "We'll go somewhere they can't find us." Eleanor wanted to believe her, but deep down she knew it wasn't that simple. The cult had taken everything from her, but it wasn't just the cult. It was something deeper, something that had been festering in their bloodline for centuries. That night, Elena lay awake, clutching a silver pendant Sophie had given her. "It's a protection charm," Sophie had said. "It will keep you safe." But as the chanting began again, Eleanor felt anything but safe. She crept downstairs, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. In the living room, she found Sophie standing by the window, staring out at the gathering below. "Sophie, what are you doing?" Elena whispered, panic rising in her throat. Sophie turned, her eyes glazed and distant. They're calling us, Elena. It's our destiny. Elena shook her head, backing away. No, I won't go back. I can't. Sophie's expression softened, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm sorry, Elena. I tried to protect you, but it's stronger than both of us. Before Elena could react, strong arms grabbed her from behind. She struggled, but the grip was unyielding. The figures dragged her outside, their chanting growing louder, more insistent. In the center of the circle, an altar stood, adorned with symbols Elena recognized from her time in the cult. The leader stepped forward, his face obscured by a hood. Elena, he intoned, you cannot escape your fate. The bloodline must be preserved. As they forced her onto the altar, Eleanor's mind raced. She had to fight, to escape. But as the ritual began, a strange calm washed over her. The chanting seeped into her mind, its rhythm both foreign and familiar. She glanced at Sophie, who stood at the edge of the circle, her eyes filled with sorrow and resignation. In that moment, Elena understood. This was bigger than both of them, a shadow that had haunted their family for generations. With a final desperate surge of strength, Eleanor reached for the silver pendant. She clutched it tightly, its cool metal grounding her. As the leader raised a ceremonial dagger, Eleanor closed her eyes, focusing on the pendant's protection. A blinding light erupted from the pendant, breaking the chanting and sending the figures reeling. Elena felt a powerful force lift her from the altar, and when she opened her eyes, she was alone in the field, the farmhouse a distant silhouette. Elena staggered to her feet, the pendant still clutched in her hand. She knew she couldn't stay. The cult, the ancient darkness, would always hunt her. But she also knew she had something they didn't: hope. With one last glance at the farmhouse, Elena turned and walked away, determined to forge a new path. The shadows would follow, but she would no longer flee. She would fight.
The Crimson Pact. Joaquin Perez was a man at the end of his rope. Bills stacked up like tombstones on the kitchen table, each one a reminder of his family's precarious existence. His wife, Maria, had taken on 2 jobs, and their daughter, Isabella, needed expensive medication. Desperation gnawed at him, a relentless beast that would not let him rest. One humid evening, while Joaquin nursed a cheap beer in a dingy bar on the outskirts of San Antonio, a man approached him. This man was a stranger in every sense of the word. Pale, with eyes that glimmered like obsidian and a smile that promised nothing good. "You look like a man in need of money," the stranger said, sliding into the seat opposite Joaquin. "I have a job for you. Dangerous, but it pays well." Joaquin eyed the man warily. "Who are you?" "Call me Mr. Black," the man replied, his voice smooth as silk. "The job is simple: retrieve a package from an old estate just outside of town. The place has a reputation, but I assure you, the reward will be worth the risk." With no other options and thoughts of his family weighing heavily on his mind, Joaquin agreed. That night, under a moon that hung like a sickle in the sky, Joaquin found himself standing before the decaying gates of the estate. Vines choked the wrought iron, and the air was thick with the scent of rot and decay. Pushing the gates open, he felt a chill run down his spine. The house loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. As he approached, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it faint, sinister laughter. He hesitated, but the thought of Maria and Isabella pushed him forward. The front door creaked open with a groan of protest, revealing a grand hallway lined with dusty portraits. The eyes of the long-dead inhabitants seemed to follow him as he moved deeper into the house. Joaquin's instructions were clear. The package was in the basement. Finding the door to the cellar, he descended the creaky stairs, each step a thunderous echo in the silence. The basement was a labyrinth of shadow and cobwebs, and the air grew colder with each step. At the far end, a single table stood, illuminated by a flickering candle. On the table lay an ornate box, covered in symbols that made Joaquin's skin crawl. He approached cautiously, reaching out to lift the box when the air grew heavy, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. "Joaquin," a voice low and gravelly hissed from the darkness. "Do you know what you seek?" He spun around, heart pounding, but saw no one. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist, forming shapes that defied explanation. "Leave now and you may yet save your soul," the voice continued, closer this time. "Take the box, and you will bring ruin upon yourself and those you love." Joaquin's hand trembled as he grasped the box. He could not afford to walk away empty-handed. As he lifted it, the symbols on its surface flared with a crimson light, and the shadows coalesced into a form. Tall, gaunt, with eyes like burning coals. "Who are you?" Joaquin demanded, his voice shaking. "I am the guardian of the damned," the figure intoned. "This place is a threshold to realms you cannot comprehend. The box you hold binds you to a fate of torment and despair." Joaquin backed away, clutching the box to his chest. "I have no choice. I need the money. My family needs it." The figure's eyes bored into him, and Joaquin felt a searing pain in his chest, as if his very soul was being scorched. "Very well," the figure said. "Take it, and may your suffering be a lesson to others." With a scream, Joaquin fled the basement, the box pulsing with a malevolent energy in his hands. He burst through the front door and sprinted to his car, the oppressive weight lifting as he crossed the threshold of the estate. Breathless, he drove back to town, the night swallowing the screams that still echoed in his mind. Mr. Black was waiting for him at the bar, that same unsettling smile on his face. "You have it?" Mr. Black asked. Joaquin nodded, handing over the box. "Now, where's my money?" Mr. Black took the box, and Joaquin saw a flash of triumph in his eyes. "As promised," Mr. Black said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Joaquin grabbed it and tore it open, his heart sinking as he saw the amount. It was more than enough to clear their debts and buy Isabella's medication. Relief washed over him, but it was tainted with the lingering dread of what he had unleashed. As Joaquin left the bar, Mr. Black's laughter followed him, a chilling reminder of the pact he had made. Weeks passed, and life seemed to return to a semblance of normalcy. But Joaquin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At night, he heard whispers and footsteps in the house, shadows flickering at the edge of his vision. One night, he awoke to find Isabella standing at the foot of his bed, her eyes vacant and her skin ashen. "Papa," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. "They're here." Panic surged through him as he realized the true cost of his decision. The house filled with a suffocating darkness, and the figures from the estate appeared, their eyes burning with the same infernal light. Joaquin tried to fight, but it was futile. The shadows overwhelmed him, dragging him into a void of agony and despair. His last thought was of Maria and Isabella, and the terrible price they would pay for his choice. In the end, Joaquin Perez learned that some deals are not worth the price, no matter how desperate the need. The Crimson Pact he had forged was unbreakable, and its curse would haunt his family for generations to come.
The gauntlet of fear. The anticipation was electric, a palpable buzz that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the old mansion. The Gauntlet of Fear was an annual event, a full-contact haunted house that drew thrill-seekers and adrenaline junkies from far and wide. The prize, a cool $50,000 and the bragging rights of having survived the most intense horror experience imaginable. This year, however, the stakes were higher, the fear more real than any of the contestants could have imagined. The mansion loomed before them, its windows like hollow eyes staring out into the night. Inside, a labyrinth of horrors awaited, each room more twisted and grotesque than the last. But what none of the contestants knew was that this year, something else lurked within the mansion's walls. A malevolent force with the ability to change its shape, a force that fed on their fear. Lila stood at the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always loved horror, the thrill of being scared out of her wits. This, however, was different. This was real. She glanced at her fellow contestants, noting the mixture of excitement and apprehension on their faces. There was Jake, the burly ex-Marine who scoffed at the idea of being scared by a haunted house. Tina, the goth girl who seemed almost too eager to face the horrors within, and Ryan, the quiet, nervous type who looked like he might bolt at any moment. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the start of the event. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, revealing the darkness within. One by one, the contestants stepped inside, the doors slamming shut behind them with a finality that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. The first room was relatively tame, a typical haunted house setup with cobwebs, creaky floors, and eerie portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them as they moved. Jake laughed, brushing off the fake spiders that dropped from the ceiling, but as they moved deeper into the mansion, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, more oppressive. They entered a narrow hallway, the walls lined with mirrors. Lila could see her own reflection, distorted and warped. She glanced at Jake, who was flexing his muscles in front of a mirror, clearly unimpressed. But then something shifted. The reflection of Jake in the mirror didn't match his movements. It smiled, a grotesque, twisted grin that didn't belong to the man standing next to her. "Jake, look," Lila whispered urgently, pointing at the mirror. Jake turned, his face blanching as he saw the reflection. The grin widened, and suddenly the mirrored Jake stepped out of the glass, its body contorting and reshaping into something monstrous. It lunged at Jake, who fought back with a ferocity born of desperation. The rest of the group watched in horror as the creature wrapped itself around Jake, its body flowing like liquid, suffocating him. "Run!" Ryan shouted, snapping the others out of their trance. They bolted down the hallway, the sounds of Jake's struggle fading behind them. They burst into the next room, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Tina panted, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know, but we need to stick together," Lila said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Whatever that thing is, it can change its shape. We can't trust what we see." They moved cautiously through the mansion, the oppressive feeling growing stronger with each step. They reached a room filled with mannequins, their lifeless eyes staring blankly. The group hesitated, the memory of the shape-shifting creature fresh in their minds. "Stay close," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. As they navigated the maze of mannequins, Lila felt a cold hand brush against her arm. She spun around, expecting to see another creature, but there was nothing there. The mannequins remained motionless, their eyes empty. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Then, without warning, the mannequins began to move. Their joints creaked as they turned their heads, their eyes locking onto the group. The contestants backed away, panic setting in. "Don't let them touch you," Tina screamed, shoving a mannequin aside as it reached for her. They ran, dodging and weaving through the sea of figures. Lila felt a hand grab her ankle, pulling her down. She kicked out, the mannequin's grip like a vice. Ryan and Tina pulled her up, dragging her to safety. They stumbled into the next room, slamming the door shut behind them. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a small, ornate box. "What's this?" Ryan asked, his curiosity piqued despite the terror they had just faced. "Don't touch it," Lila warned, but it was too late. Ryan reached for the box, lifting the lid. A cloud of dark smoke billowed out, filling the room. The smoke coalesced into a figure, its form shifting and changing, a mass of writhing darkness. "Welcome," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You have entered my domain. You are mine now." The group backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The door was gone, replaced by a solid wall. The creature advanced, its shape constantly shifting, a grotesque amalgamation of faces and limbs. Lila's mind raced. They had to fight back, had to find a way out. She grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor, brandishing it like a weapon. The creature laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "You think you can fight me?" it mocked. "I am fear itself. I am your darkest nightmares." But Lila didn't back down. She swung the wood at the creature, but it passed through its smoky form, hitting nothing but air. The creature laughed again, wrapping its tendrils around her, squeezing the breath from her lungs. In a final, desperate act, Lila screamed, her voice echoing through the room. The walls began to shake, the creature's form flickering. The other contestants joined in, their screams merging into a cacophony of sound. The creature writhed, its form destabilizing. With a final ear-piercing shriek, it dissipated, the darkness lifting. The walls of the room faded, revealing the mansion's entrance. Lila collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. They had survived, but the experience had left its mark. As they stumbled out into the night, the mansion's doors closing behind them, they knew they would never be the same. The gauntlet of fear had lived up to its name, and the malevolent force within the mansion would haunt their nightmares for years to come.
Guardians of the Kaiju Realm. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Assignment. The sun was setting over the bustling city of New York when I got the call. My name is Katie Mitchell, and I work for a non-profit environmental organization called Gaia's Embrace. We deal with protecting endangered species and habitats. But what awaited me was far beyond anything I could imagine. Mitchell, pack your bags, you're heading to Japan, my boss, Dr. Emily Hargrove, said without preamble. There's a situation that requires your immediate attention. I blinked in confusion. What kind of situation? You'll be briefed on the plane, just know this. You're going to be part of a very special preservation effort, one that involves creatures we've only read about in science fiction. Chapter 2, The Portal. 24 hours later, I found myself in a secret facility deep within the Japanese wilderness. Dr. Hargrove and a team of scientists were waiting for me. Welcome, Katie, she greeted me. You're about to enter a parallel world where kaiju are real. Our mission is to protect them from human exploitation. I stared at her, thinking this had to be some elaborate prank. Kaiju? Like giant monsters? Exactly. We've discovered a portal to this world and we've set up a base camp to monitor and study them. But now there's a threat. Illegal poachers have found a way in and they're capturing kaiju for profit. Chapter 3. Entering the Realm. I was handed a sleek, high-tech suit designed for protection and mobility. After a quick briefing, I followed Dr. Hargrove and the team through the shimmering portal. The transition was instantaneous. One moment we were in the facility, the next we were in a lush, vibrant jungle unlike anything on Earth. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of strange, alien wildlife filled the air. Massive trees towered above us, their canopies teeming with life. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A kaiju. It was a magnificent creature, easily 30 feet tall, with scales that glinted in the sunlight like precious gems. It moved gracefully through the jungle, oblivious to our presence. That's a juvenile kaiju, Dr. Hargrove whispered. We call her Luna. She's just a baby compared to some of the others. Chapter 4, The Threat. We set up camp in a clearing using advanced camouflage technology to blend into the surroundings. Our first task was to locate and stop the poachers. I was paired with Dr. Daniel Kim, a biologist who had been in the kaiju realm for months. We've had reports of poachers setting traps near the river, Daniel explained. They use technology to subdue the kaiju and transport them back to our world. It's cruel and dangerous. We trekked through the jungle, careful to avoid disturbing the wildlife. As we approached the river, we heard the unmistakable sounds of machinery. Peering through the underbrush, we saw a group of heavily armed men setting up a massive cage. We need to stop them, Daniel said urgently. If they capture a kaiju, it could be disastrous. Chapter 5. Confrontation. We waited until nightfall, then moved in. Using tranquilizer darts and non-lethal weapons, we incapacitated the poachers one by one. But just as we were about to secure the area, a loud roar echoed through the jungle. A massive kaiju, easily 50 feet tall, emerged from the trees. It was angry, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The poachers had injured it, and now it was on a rampage. "Run!" Daniel shouted, pulling me back as the kaiju charged. We barely escaped its path of destruction. The poachers weren't so lucky. The creature's massive tail swept through the clearing, sending them flying. We need to calm it down, Daniel said, breathing heavily. If it continues like this, it could destroy the entire area. Chapter 6. A Delicate Balance. Using a combination of pheromones and calming sounds, we managed to soothe the kaiju. It eventually lumbered away, back into the depths of the jungle. That was close, I said, my heart still pounding. Too close, Daniel agreed. We need to find a way to secure the portal and prevent any more poachers from getting through. Chapter 7. The Solution. Back at camp, Dr. Hargrove and the team devised a plan. We would use a combination of advanced technology and magic, a rare and ancient practice in this realm, to seal the portal. It's a risky procedure, Dr. Hargrove admitted, but it's the only way to protect the kaiju. We gathered the necessary materials and performed the ritual. The air crackled with energy as we chanted the ancient words. Slowly, the portal began to shrink until it was no more than a tiny, shimmering dot. "It's done," Dr. Hargrove said, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The kaiju are safe." Chapter 8, A New Beginning. With the portal sealed, we focused on studying and preserving the kaiju in their natural habitat. Over the following months, I learned more about these incredible creatures than I ever thought possible. Each kaiju had its own personality, its own role in the ecosystem. We continued our work, ensuring that this parallel world remained untouched by human greed and exploitation. The kaiju were safe, and in a way, so were we. For in protecting them, we had found a sense of purpose and belonging. And as I watched Luna playfully splash in the river, I knew that we were doing the right thing. The kaiju were more than just giant monsters. They were guardians of their realm, and now we were their guardians too.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.